EVs are growing at several magnitudes faster than internal combustion engine. I think I'm correct in saying China either has reached its peak oil consumption or will do so next year. Instead of investing their excess profits in new production or new exploration, the large oil and gas companies, they're returning it to shareholders or doing buyback. And in parallel, this huge expansion of clean tech, renewable energy is a shift, and we have, I think, passed that. You can imagine this shift away from combustion-based technologies to 100% electrification. So this shift will change supply chains. A perfect example is the automotive sector, where you have EVs. It's a completely different product. It's a completely different supply chain. And that's happening in many, many sectors in the industrial world. And we're seeing more and more companies in the whole industrial space jumping on the climate bandwagon to push governments to go further and faster so they can make their investments worthwhile.
Will Mr. Trump make a difference? The fact that he has been very pro-oil, he has been supporting the fossil fuel sector very vocally.
He can't force them to drill for oil if it's not economical and they can't see returns. I mean, clearly he is, for example, offering them subsidies to keep their coal plants open, but they're just not interested. So you can say all of this, that you can't fight the market and a long-term trend. India still has the majority of its power generation from coal, but that is declining and renewables are increasing very rapidly. So it's kind of like they will meet sometime in the future and coal will decline. China now dominates global markets for solar panels, for wind, and has a big position in storage. It's based its success on its domestic market, and as a result of the Chinese government policy. India has huge potential because of its huge domestic market to develop a huge solar industry that could rival China's industry in that area for exports and project development outside of India. Technology and market shifts and consumer demand is pushing for a low carbon future. And so they have to get on board with this or they will die, especially in the energy intensive sectors.
Welcome to Talking Tomorrow. I'm Sudipto Dey. With COP30 just around the corner, there's a lot happening globally and right here in India too. The country is really at an exciting point where pushing climate goals can actually go hand in hand with the growing of the economy. In this very first episode, we are diving into why clean tech investments is becoming such a big deal for India's future. Science tells us we have got to move fast for cutting emissions and building resilience. We'll be chatting about how India can turn its social and climate goals into real opportunities. I'm thrilled to welcome Dylan Tanner to the show. He is co-founder and executive director of InfluenceMap. Over the last 10 years, Dylan and his team have been digging into how companies act on climate change and how they influence policies around it. Dylan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We were going through your profile on LinkedIn, and yours has been a fascinating journey. You sort of from a sustainability consultant guiding businesses in the low carbon journey, you kind of now show the mirror to the businesses when it comes to their corporate climate action. So how did this transition take place, and could you take us through this transition?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be in your podcast. Let me take you back. I was born and raised in Japan, and we're English, UK citizens, so every year we'd go back to England and travel through Asia. And so I developed a love for nature, especially in this part of the world, and that became my first career. I set up a sustainability consultancy in Japan. It was quite successful, brought some new ideas and technologies to the market. I think that was really good. I realized the impact of working with companies, and that companies are only interested in their own operations, their own profit and loss. And if it happens to coincide with sustainability, they will do that, but they don't attempt to change the system. So I finished with that, retired, sold the company, and did some other stuff. And then the new venture I set up is a not-for-profit InfluenceMap, and it looks at this theme of how to make companies more accountable for their impact on the system in the climate context. So we're looking at corporate influence over the climate and nature agendas and how they influence policy. We look at the entire corporate sector. So there's good actors and bad actors and everything in between.
So could you take us through some of the work that we have done on your... I believe you also have, you're looking at India on a specific...
So we look at all the companies in the world, the top 1,000 by economic size. Okay. Some of them are from India. But because this issue of influencing is a very local issue, it's sometimes very sensitive, we need to adapt our global methodology to suit each region in terms of the policies that are in place and the business customs and the language, and then communicate that to the local stakeholders. So we launched our India platform. I think, we started the research and then we launched it, I think this year. Mm-hmm. And we're covering a number of Indian companies and also Indian trade associations who do a lot of the collaborative engagement with government on these issues. So and then we're going to build on that and work with stakeholders to ensure it has an impact in the marketplace.
So what exactly is the sort of the service that you're offering, in the sense that could you give a sample of what is it that say the corporates or civil society organizations, what is it that they are sort of, what is the service that you're offering to them?
Well, we're a nonprofit, so we don't sell our service, we sell impact, and that's that's how our business model. We're funded by philanthropic foundations. I should say the reason the reason I established InfluenceMap, which is 10 years ago now, a long time. Anyway, it was around the time of the Paris Agreement, which was a very important climate conference. And one of the themes of the Paris Agreement was inclusion of non-state actors in the tent to make sure there's some big consent. And they involved a lot of business community. Mm-hmm. And I was speaking to some of the conveners of that. And there was the elephant in the room was, well, yes, they all say the right things, but behind the scenes, they're influencing and controlling governments, mm-hmm. often in a negative way. Mm-hmm. And so how can we measure this? So we set up InfluenceMap to do that. And, we don't have the necessary climate policy anywhere in the world to solve climate change. And a big issue is negative influence by a certain portion of the corporate sector, the fossil fuel sector, and maybe not enough positive action by the rest of the sectors. So our system allows many stakeholders to solve this blockage. If you don't have the data, you can't understand the system and if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, basically.
Absolutely. But corporates playing a role of climate advocates, honestly, how realistic is this expectation? You think, are we being too utopian?
Well, no, we live in the real world. And so ever since, for thousands of years, corporations or merchants or whatever have influenced policy because most sectors or many sectors, their business model depends on the regulatory framework, especially power sector, automotive, whatever. So they're in the room, they're influencing it. That is the fact. So what we want to see happen is for the process to be more transparent, so everybody can see what their positions are and how they're influencing it, and they can't hide behind third parties and other things. And then, of course, we want the positions to be aligned with climate science and not against it, not trying to delay necessary action. So that's what our information helps the whole system move in that direction.
Interesting. Your report, India-specific report, I think research shows that majority of Indian companies and industry associations have very low level of engagement with climate policy. I think it appeared sometime in June this year. Mm-hmm. What is your assessment of this? You see this as a case of opportunity cost mismatch, or what is your assessment of this finding?
I think it could be that it's just not transparent and that we cannot detect the necessary data in the public domain. But on the positive side, I think in many countries there is a very powerful and negative opposition to climate action, particularly from the fossil fuel sector, to the point where it used to be climate denial, but we call it climate delayism now. They recognize the problem, but arguing about the details and putting a lot of misinformation into the market. That doesn't seem to be present in India. We see most companies agreeing with the government's agenda on climate and pushing for maybe a stronger NDC, agreeing with the net zero target and so forth. What we would want to see and what our data shows is there's room for a lot more transparency. Okay. And transparency then encourages other companies to speak up and kind of builds a movement around this, which then the government can respond to more confidently, because governments and companies cannot solve this issue alone. They have to collaborate, and that collaboration needs to be honest and transparent. Maybe I'm being naive there, but there certainly has to be a lot of clarity over which companies are pursuing which policies, as opposed to constant behind-the-scenes horse trading that tends to go on. Mm-hmm. That would greatly help. And just before this, we started recording, you mentioned renewable energy companies. They absolutely, desperately need strong climate policy for their business investments. So, they don't have the coordination and power of the fossil fuel sector. Traditionally, they're often new companies or one conglomerate doing both activities. So they need a much bigger voice and to collaborate more strongly, say, with the demand side companies as well.
Interesting. So how should investors, so once somebody has access to your report, the India report, say, what should investors make out of it? From investor perspective, what is the sort of message that you'd how have they reacted to those reports?
So the investors have been one of the first users of our content since a long time ago. And the reason they are interested in this is because, well, let me be more specific of which investors I'm talking about. I'm talking about the large pension funds who have a long-term objective and they own the entire market. They call them the universal owners. They don't day trade and they don't try and hedge, and they just own everything. And they have an interest in seeing a resolution of climate change because it's a systemic risk, it affects the economy. So they want to weed out negative lobbying to allow policy to happen. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is our data is a kind of a proxy for corporate behavior on the energy transition. So is a company planning for net zero at some time in the future? And if they're lobbying now against it, then it means they're not. And so investors need to understand that behavior. And just one example, when we launched InfluenceMap, a few months later, Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal broke, and the Volkswagen lost 40% of its value overnight. Mm-hmm. But it was being promoted and promoting itself as the most sustainable car company in the world. And at the same time, it was cheating on its emissions and capturing the regulations. So that information is essential for investors to understand the real behavior of companies. And they don't always, companies are not always totally honest about their activities, as you know.
Mm-hmm. So do you think it will help in checking greenwashing?
Yes. I mean, if there's a gap between what they say and then what they're doing in terms of the lobbying, then yeah, the investors are like, which is it? Are you supporting this or are you just saying it? And it's very easy to put a long-term target, 2070, 2050. The CEO and the executives will not be around then, so they don't feel too much pressure about accountability for long-term. But this is here and now information which checks companies.
Absolutely. So from your assessment, how aligned are Indian companies to climate regulations? What's your assessment?
The data we have shows that most companies are fairly supportive of government regulations and a ambitious climate agenda. So that's a really positive signal, and I think it's a signal that it's a signal to the government that they have a fairly supportive corporate sector. But I would caveat by saying that we need more information from all the players actually to have a better view. So again, more transparency might be needed.
Interesting. Early this year, S&P had a report which talked about, which was widely covered in media also, spoke about 2025 being a tipping year, when Cleantech energy investments would surpass the investments in upstream oil and gas for the first time. Have we crossed the tipping point? What is the assessment that you have?
So yeah, we have. So let me give you some facts maybe associated. So last year, more than 85% of new electric power generation installed is either wind, solar, or storage.
Okay.
So renewable energy. EVs are growing at several magnitudes faster than ICE, internal combustion engine. I think I'm correct in saying China either has reached its peak oil consumption or will do so next year. So this is the second or largest oil consumer in the world is because of their EV uptake. So in parallel with this, we see the large oil and gas companies, as you mentioned, instead of investing their excess profits in new production or new exploration, they're returning it to shareholders or doing buybacks or some other use of that. And in parallel, this huge expansion of Cleantech, renewable energy, is a shift, and we have, I think, passed that that turning point.
So how do you see, say, from now 2030 and beyond 2030, how do you see this playing out in as the Cleantech, this thrust towards Cleantech investments, it gathers more momentum, takes deeper root in this industrial energy ecosystem. What is your sort of, if you could possibly do a crystal ball gazing in terms of over the next, say, beyond 2030?
Well, I mean, you can imagine this shift away from combustion-based technologies to 100% electrification. And so this shift will change supply chains, and it's not just the final power generation facility, it's the entire supply chain. And this is maybe a perfect example is the automotive sector, where you have EVs versus ICE, and it's a completely different product. It's a completely different supply chain. And that's happening in many, many sectors in the industrial world. And so we're seeing more and more companies in the whole industrial space jumping on the climate bandwagon to push governments to go further and faster so they can make their investments worthwhile.
So definitely you expect this thrust towards clean tech investment to gain more momentum.
The clean tech is maybe it's just business. It's non-combustion based technology and more focus on systems and electrification, and then that brings in possibilities of far more precise control of the power generation and demand and use by the consumer and by the customers. As you see in some of the EVs available, they can be maintained remotely by software and stuff. So it's changing a whole range of sectors in the electrification process. And this is there's other changes in different sectors like agriculture and food and stuff. But that's
in India also we are seeing a lot of solarization of agriculture, where the motor pumps are being powered by solar energy.
Yeah.
And there's a government scheme which is encouraging that. Of course, there are rooftop solar, which is a sort of a very pet project of the government itself.
Yeah. And you can imagine that so that replaces that dirty diesel generator that's noisy in the background all the time, and all of the components and lubrication for all of that will no longer be needed. So there's different new opportunities for different companies doing different things.
In terms of, say, as we move towards a clean tech ecosystem, you think it will have an impact on the geopolitics also, in terms of, say, we have seen the oil companies, post World War II, the oil companies more or less had a big influence on the regulations and the. So you see that changing. All these as the clean tech gathers more, gets its roots are getting more stronger, it more deeper. You see that there'll be impact on the geopolitics also.
Certainly the countries and companies that derive their income from oil and gas and fossil fuels need to basically diversify, otherwise they're in trouble. Because I've just mentioned peak oil in China, and we're seeing maybe peak oil full stop, and the price declining from here. The Western oil and gas companies, Exxon, Shell, Chevron, etc., they are not part of this transition, I don't think. Our data suggests, there was a time maybe 5 years ago where they're trying to say, okay, we're going to move into new energy, renewable energy. Mostly they've abandoned those plans because it doesn't have the same margins. And so I suspect that they will shrink the companies and maybe try and fight climate change policy as much as they can until they can't, and then they will perhaps be smaller versions of themselves and then fade away. But they haven't managed to successfully transform. Maybe you mentioned geopolitics. I cannot say what will happen with a lot of these countries that have all of their revenue from oil and gas, but they should be concerned now.
But will Mr. Trump make a difference? I'm going to say the fact that he has been very pro oil, and he has been sort of supporting the fossil fuel sector, very vocally. You think that will make a difference?
No, he can't force them to drill for oil if it's not economical and they can't see returns. Clearly he is, for example, offering the U.S. Utilities, coal power, offering them subsidies to keep their coal plants open, but they're just not interested. So you can say all of this, but you can't fight the market and a long-term trend.
Interesting. Coming back to clean tech, and Indian industries, if you look at it as we discussed earlier about renewables, and there has been over the last 10 years or so focus on the RE side, the renewable energy side, and that has been the driver for India.
Mm-hmm.
You see, this is the right time for Indian companies to up their game on the clean tech investments front. Is this the right time now? And they should.
Absolutely. So, if I'm correct, I'm seeing India still has a majority of its power generation from coal. But that is declining and renewables are increasing very rapidly. So it's kind of like they will meet sometime in the future and coal will decline. An analogy is what's happened in China. The China now dominates global markets for solar panels, for wind, and has a big position in storage. So all the renewable, and it's based its success on its domestic market and as a result of the Chinese government policy. So India has huge potential because of its huge domestic market for all of these, for solar in particular, to develop a huge solar industry that could be could rival China's industry in that area for exports and project development outside of India. So that's a huge advantage that the renewable energy here has is they have a massive domestic market, and if they can collaborate with the government and get the policies right, and the electricity market and all of the permitting and the distribution that's needed for renewables, then that would be a huge opportunity. And then that brings in other opportunities related to renewable energy around systems, storage, and kind of a software approach to this as opposed to just burning stuff in a big unit.
So what would be your advice to corporate India if they are to ramp up their exposure in clean tech technology? What would be your advice to them be?
So I would say the success of clean tech is history has shown that it's dependent on strong government policy to promote those clean technology, at least in the early stages.
Okay.
They need the kind of the market conditions to allow investment, so the polluters cannot just get away with it and have cheaper products, basically. So for that, they need stronger and more collaborative policy engagement with the government to develop that and to show a strong signal to the government that if the government produces these regulatory frameworks, they're ready to invest in a big way. And one thing I think that maybe they need to find new collaborations outside of the traditional industry associations that they are members of to show this signal to governments, and also bring in some of the powerful demand side companies, particularly global companies who have supply chains in India, and they have a renewable energy proliferation through the supply chain conditions, like the big tech companies from the US, for example, would make a suitable ally in this engagement in the messaging.
So you'd your prescription would be to have more collaborations or have more, because India itself as a domestic market, that has been the driving force for India's economy, the domestic demand.
Yeah.
So your prescription would be that have more technical or technology collaborations and ramp up your
collaborate with each other more effectively, the whole value chain, and also show this signal to the government. I mean, there's also the element of, there will be some, there are sectors that will lose out, oil and gas and thermal coal and coal mining. So there has to be a discussion about just transition of the employees and the stakeholders in those sectors at the same time. So that has to be kind of part of their engagement strategy. It's not just, okay, well, this is gone now and that's it. There is a genuine issue in many markets, but here as well.
Is there anything, I'm going to say, different in India that you see compared to other markets? You are exposure to so many markets. Is there something that's standing out in India or something different that you see in India?
Well, as I mentioned, we don't and I will mention in Canada we have presence there. In Australia and the US, you have this just battle between the fossil fuel industry and its interest, its various agents, just denying the problem. And it just, we don't see that so much in India. We see some of the big conglomerates operating both fossil fuel and renewable, and maybe they're trying to just play them both until one becomes more profitable or something. But there doesn't seem to be this polarization of the climate issue. It seems to be, it's assessed as a scientific issue, one of science, not of politics or belief or whatever. And as you know, in the US, it's that.
Interesting. From the regulatory aspect, when we talk about this Cleantech investment flow, what would be your sort of assessment or advice to the policymakers? If India is to give a boost and to push to Cleantech investments, what would be your advice to policymakers?
I will maybe focus on the climate situation, the carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. I think we're seeing a trend, especially in Europe. You're familiar with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is, it's kind of the Commission has it's a big market, especially for India, and they are trying to push through a Green Deal. And one of the mechanisms to protect their market from basically imports that from companies that do not, they're in the absence of a global agreement, they are doing the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment, which is a price on carbon. I understand that there is a emerging emissions trading system here, and so it's an opportunity to demonstrate to markets, and Europe is not the only market that's likely to come up with this kind of tariff on the border for imports. So that's an opportunity for India and to gain a competitive advantage and access to these markets without that tariff, if they can show that their emissions trading system is on kind of an equal footing. I also understand that there is a green taxonomy being discussed and implemented. There's very similar things going on in different parts of the world. So that will allow this kind of the interaction between trade and the climate agenda, which is kind of the way that the climate regulations seem to be playing out around the world in the absence of some kind of global agreement. So this is something that it's very promising for the Indian government to be devising its own systems around this that can maybe be compared and compatible with other systems.
Okay.
As well as I'm not going to comment too much about Indian, but much needed. One of the biggest factors in the climate issue for countries is reform of their electricity markets and ensuring that that they're open to new energy, to small scale energy storage and stuff like that. So that's something I think is happening in India, and that's something that is not happening in some markets, and it's a hindrance. So that is a positive step.
So we are like 3 weeks away, or 3 weeks or so away from COP30 in Brazil. How should CSOs, what should CSOs expect from those deliberations, or the sustainability professionals expect from those deliberations? Could you give us a preview of what to expect from COP30?
Yeah, so we host events for CSOs and sustainability professionals, and the message they bring and that we encourage is this is very much a business issue. It's not a sustainability issue, at least for climate change and increasingly for nature. So that is how the CSOs should show up at COP, promoting this not as some separate communications exercise, but alongside their CEO and senior executives with the correct messaging. This is what, if they are a business leader, this is we need a strong climate agenda, and that they should maybe just leave the sustainability argument out and focus on the business case, the investments, and why we need climate policy, because we're investing in climate solutions.
Mm-hmm. So does InfluenceMap have a presence out there? I mean,
we're trying to. This, as you know, accommodation and is very so. But I will try and attend. We have a lot of collaborators, and we will host if I get to go, if I can find a hotel. We will host some events around policy engagement leadership with our partners there.
But on the whole, like if you look at COP, the previous COPs and going forward, what has been your sort of take away from them in terms of how much do they sort of in terms of pushing the climate agenda, or as we discussed earlier, this transparency, in terms of what corporates do, what corporates, how corporates behave. You think, is that helping that cause?
I can understand people are frustrated and disillusioned with the COP process. I mean, we're on COP 30. So that just goes to show, but they are still useful for the world leaders to meet, and I question the need for there to be so many other actors, corporate actors in the space. But it's still. I don't think we're going to solve climate change by another 10 COPs. I think that in my personal opinion is that. More bilateral or like relationships between, say, in India, Europe, and Brazil or whatever, may be more meaningful, and this is happening. But we still need the COP process, and I don't think they need to be such huge events and almost trade shows. But there definitely needs to be a space within the UN system for every nation to meet on this topic regularly.
So is there anything specific in COP30 that is of interest to you? I'm going to say, is there any specific theme that you feel you would expect it to be debated or discussed out there?
So one of the themes that the Brazilian government is trying to promote is the importance of a just transition, not just for employees of sectors that are going to be made redundant, but also collateral damage of climate change impacts in many parts of the world. And so there needs to be much more inclusion of the other CSOs, civil society groups who represent these stakeholders in the process. So I think they deliberately chose Amazonia to highlight the impact there, and that will be a big focus. Mm-hmm. And also Yeah, of course, a big focus will be the role of forests. As you know, the science seems to indicate that if we are to solve climate change in a controlled manner as opposed to a chaotic manner, probably a third of the solution needs to come from preserving on the forests, forest sinks. So that the most important one is Amazonia. So that will be a big focus.
And is that something that's of interest to you?
Yes, absolutely. So we started out with a program on climate policy. Now we have a program on nature policy, and they're different. As you know, they have a COP for nature as well going on. It's a different process, but they strongly overlap because the forest sinks. You need to preserve the biodiversity within the forest to preserve the forest. So that's a strong overlap. And land use is also important in climate.
So how do you link, the business interests with these? Because we know for a fact that as businesses expand, as there's a push towards, say, be it, businesses to grow or say mining activities, forests do come under threat, And so how do you see linkages getting developed out here? And say, what is the sense you are getting?
We do see linkages. It's a little less clear than climate change, where you can see just a transition of the energy sector and massive new opportunities for a whole range of actors. But in the same manner, if we're to transform agriculture and land use to more regenerative agriculture, that also presents a transformative opportunity for the food industry. We just need to see more, perhaps, policy signals from governments and, of course, consumer demand for this stuff. So it's a little bit behind the climate issue in terms of the business case, but we see it. We can see what it will be. We just need to get there a little more quickly.
So what would be your expectation from COP30? Now, is there any sort of, you have seen quite a few COPs. So
yeah,
what would be your expectation from COP30?
Not a huge expectation. I would like to see some declaration of the forest sink aspect become more cohesive, and perhaps more statements around land use is the best outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there will be a U.S. presence. It's not the administration, but it's a delegation of Democratic senators who, and some of the state level representatives who remind the world that the U.S. is a very diverse ecosystem and it's not just one person.
That's an important message.
Yeah.
You think that will make an impact, and that will make the fact that we know
in the last Trump administration, the U.S. had a very, very big presence with about 10 governors, 10 senators, and et cetera, et cetera. So it does remind the world that there is an election every 2 and 4 years, and things can change quickly.
So there's life beyond Trump also.
Yes, there is. He will not be around forever.
Absolutely. Well,
but I don't want to get into that. We could stay for another hour talking about that.
I understand. It's but tell me one thing, coming back to InfluenceMap, and the fact that it's been 10 years of InfluenceMap, you have seen how businesses have changed, reacted, transformed over the last 10 years. Could you give us some sort of a sense in terms of, have businesses really become much more responsible now, say 10 years back and now? Or if you have to look at the last 10 years, what's your sense overall?
I wouldn't say the word is responsible, but they are now responding much more forcefully to the climate agenda. And there's a big groundswell of companies that are really changing their business models. And this is not in response to ethics or anything like that. It's response to the regulatory pathway, which is heading in one direction. It might zigzag up and down on the way, but it's heading in that direction. Technology and market shifts and consumer demand is pushing for a low carbon future. And so they have to get on board with this or they will die, especially in the energy intensive sectors. That's the big. 10 years ago, it was mostly just communications and posturing, and now this is real. Mm-hmm. That's the big shift. And I think our work has helped them understand and navigate the policy landscape, especially dealing with industry associations and representation. And it's kind of a detailed, nerdy topic, but it's absolutely essential to get this policy done.
And, there's been fear of greenwashing and even green hushing, and where do you stand in that debate? A lot of, there have been a lot of talk about the fact that given putting the spotlight on the corporates leads to green hushing, while greenwashing is something we have been living with. What has been your sense? What is the sense you are getting out of?
Yeah, no, they're definitely U.S. companies are more silent on these topics, a range of topics. I think that by being silent, they can also get attacked for being silent, and by various actors, especially after the current administration is gone, they may be accused of just, silence is complicit with whatever action is going on. So I don't want to give advice to companies, but I will, is saying you can't have it both ways. You can't be reaping the benefits of all of this stuff but remain silent, because no one will know, people will not know what you're doing, and you need to tell your stakeholders what it is. And just the important point is to remain consistent and not treat this as like some communications exercise. It has to be coming from within the strategy of the company.
Interesting. And how receptive have been Indian companies? Of course, you have been there in India for some time now. How receptive have been Indian companies to your research reports, to your findings?
We've had a bunch of good meetings. I can't mention the names of the companies, but especially with the heavy industrial companies, which is really promising. Really real interest in our information. The comment is, we've never seen this type of analysis before for India, and it's really useful and novel, and we'll take a look at it.
And what are your plans? Like, do you at some point of time looking at having a presence in India?
We're certainly going to expand our content, maintain it, and expand our engagements either through some representation or through frequent visits. The team has Indian origins and speak and understand the business culture fluently, so that will be our approach.
Interesting.
But most importantly, we will continually talk to local stakeholders in various parts of the ecosystem to make sure our work is useful and sensitive and lands well.
Mm-hmm. So hopefully we're going to see more of you in India.
Yes, or my team.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you for your time and the fact that you could spare time with us. And I understand that you're rushing between your visits, and we really appreciate the fact that you could be here.
No, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.